Bella, a gentle homegrown cat, never thought her quiet life would change. But when a mysterious illness begins to consume young Lucas and a fire threatens everything she holds dear, Bella must overcome her own fears and trust her instincts to save her family. Can a small cat, seemingly powerless, really make a difference in a life or death struggle? Or will the flames consume them all? The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the small house in suburban California. Bella, a sleek tabby cat with soft fur and eyes like liquid gold, stretched lazily on the windowsill, watching the world outside. The neighborhood was quiet, just like every other day, with birds chirping, the distant hum of passing cars, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the light breeze. Bella had always been content in this peaceful corner of the world. The routine was familiar, and she felt safe, nestled in the warmth of the house, surrounded by the sounds of her family. Lucas, the 3-year-old boy she loved more than anything, was playing on the floor in the living room, his tiny hands clutching his favorite toy. His laughter filled the house like music, innocent and carefree. Sarah, his mother, sat nearby, reading a book but keeping one eye on him. James, Lucas's father, was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the smell of garlic and herbs wafting through the house. Everything was normal, peaceful. Bella curled up closer to the window, the golden sun casting a gentle glow on her fur. She was happy in her little world, content with the quiet life she led. Every day was the same. Lucas's laughter, Sarah's soothing voice, and James's calm presence. She would follow Lucas around, chasing after his toy mouse, purring when he needed comfort, and sitting by his side when he was sick, as she always had. Bella was more than a pet. She was a protector, a friend, and a source of comfort. But even in this serene world, Bella felt a strange unease. Something was off, though she couldn't quite put her paw on it. Lucas had been quiet recently. Too quiet. He had been sick more often than usual, and his once bright eyes seemed tired. Bella watched him now, his small body curled up on the floor, eyes distant as he played alone. Sarah noticed it too, and her brow furrowed with concern as she glanced up from her book. "Lucas?" she called gently. "Are you feeling okay, sweetheart?" Lucas barely looked up. He mumbled something unintelligible, his face pale, his eyes glazed over with exhaustion. Sarah immediately put her book down and knelt beside him, placing her hand on his forehead. "He's burning up again," she whispered to herself, but loud enough for Bella to hear. "I don't know what's wrong, James. It's like he's getting worse." James, hearing her concern, appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His eyes were filled with worry, but there was a sense of helplessness in his voice when he said, "We'll take him to the doctor again tomorrow. We'll figure this out." But Bella, watching from the windowsill, knew something was wrong. Her sharp instincts told her that Lucas's condition wasn't just illness. Something deeper was at play. But what? Bella felt it deep in her bones, the kind of unease that only animals could understand. It was the same feeling she'd had when storms were coming. The air felt thick with tension, something unspoken, something she couldn't quite identify. She stood, stretching out her paws, and padded quietly to Lucas's side. As she nuzzled his small hand, he smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Bella's fur stood slightly on end. There was more to this than just illness, and she would find out what it was. She had to protect Lucas, no matter what. The sun continued to dip lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. Bella, still perched on the windowsill, watched the sky turn from pale blue to soft pinks and oranges. It was a typical California evening, warm, quiet, with a gentle breeze rustling through the palm trees outside. The neighborhood, nestled near the edge of the vast California desert, was serene, yet there was something in the air that felt almost too calm. Bella's fur bristled slightly as she shifted her weight on the windowsill, her golden eyes narrowing as she scanned the surroundings. Inside the house, the ambiance was familiar. Sarah had tucked her hair behind her ear, her face etched with concern as she bent over Lucas, brushing his hair away from his forehead. The boy's skin felt like fire, even hotter than earlier that afternoon. "Lucas, sweetheart, I think we should go to the hospital, just to make sure this isn't something more serious," Sarah said softly, her voice a mixture of worry and maternal care. She lifted the boy gently, wrapping a blanket around his small body to keep him warm. Lucas stirred slightly, but didn't protest, his limp form resting against Sarah's chest. There was an eerie silence in the air now, as if everything had come to a halt. James appeared in the doorway of the living room, his casual demeanor now overtaken by a deep, unsettling concern. He glanced at Sarah, his lips pressed into a tight line. "Let's give him a bit of rest tonight. Maybe it's just the heat. We've all been feeling a little off with this weather." "I don't know, James," Sarah replied, her voice thick with uncertainty. "Something feels wrong. It's like he's fading away right in front of me. I can feel it." James placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a small squeeze, his eyes filled with unease. "We'll figure it out, Sarah. I promise. But I'm not sure the hospital will have answers tonight." Bella's eyes followed the two of them as they moved to the kitchen, Lucas still nestled in his mother's arms. She felt an odd sense of helplessness gnaw at her. She had been by Lucas's side during every fever, every tired moment, offering her soft purrs and comforting presence. But tonight felt different. The air was too thick, the temperature rising rapidly as if the house itself were burning with a subtle intensity that no one else could feel. She padded silently after them, her tail twitching nervously as she reached the kitchen doorway. James had already returned to his task of chopping vegetables, his back turned, but Bella noticed his movements were slower than usual, as though he were weighed down by something invisible. Sarah, meanwhile, had gone to the phone, her fingers dialing the doctor's number, but as the phone rang, Bella could see that she wasn't really hearing the ring anymore. Her attention was elsewhere. Bella's instincts screamed at her, and for the first time, she realized the familiar setting of the house wasn't as comforting as it had been. Something was wrong. She didn't know if it was the shadows stretching unnaturally long across the room, or the stillness that hung heavy in the air. But Bella could feel it in her bones. The unease was not just from Lucas's illness. The familiar noise of the front door opening startled Bella, and she darted to the living room to find Sarah's mother, an older woman in her 60s, entering the house. She had always been a welcoming presence, a doting grandmother who was quick to spoil Lucas with stories and treats. But tonight, her steps were slower, and her face looked pale under the fluorescent lights. "You're here late," Sarah said, her voice hoarse from concern. She quickly approached her mother, but Bella noticed a tremor in Sarah's mother's hand as she placed it on Sarah's arm. "I was driving past the hills, and I saw the smoke," Sarah's mother said, her voice shaky. "The fire's closer. It's much closer than I expected." Bella's ears perked up at the mention of fire. The dry season was upon them, but she hadn't seen any signs of wildfires being that near, at least not yet. The foothills that surrounded their home were a common concern in California, especially during the hotter months, but the fire seemed distant, nothing more than an occasional worry in the back of their minds. "What?" Sarah asked, her eyes widening in sudden realization. "You saw the fire?" "I saw the smoke. It's coming this way," Sarah's mother continued, a tone of disbelief in her voice. "You should be careful. I think the wind might push it here faster than anyone anticipated." Bella, having caught the drift of the conversation, darted to the back window and glanced outside, her keen eyes searching the horizon. There, barely visible through the dense foliage, was a faint flicker, a glow on the horizon. At first, Bella dismissed it, thinking it might be a trick of the light. But then the smell hit her, the scent of smoke. Not just distant, but unmistakable. It was real, and it was getting closer. Suddenly, Bella felt a deep sense of urgency. She dashed back to Lucas's side, nuzzling his small hand with her soft nose, her instincts telling her something was terribly wrong. The fire was approaching, and no one had noticed yet? The family's attention was divided, each person absorbed in their own thoughts and fears about Lucas's illness. But Bella's focus was sharp. The fire, though distant at first, was now far too close for comfort. She sensed the danger before anyone else did, like the animals who instinctively sense storms long before humans even know they're coming. Bella jumped onto the couch and then the table, trying to get closer to Lucas. He shifted uncomfortably, his feverish body twitching in his mother's arms. Bella nuzzled him again, louder this time, pushing against his small chest, as though she were trying to communicate her growing urgency. Sarah stood up, startled by the force of Bella's behavior. "What is it, girl? What's wrong?" Bella meowed softly, her tail flicking back and forth, staring at Lucas, her gaze intense. Then, something within Bella clicked. The fire wasn't just a looming danger. The smoke in the air, the strange dizziness Lucas had been feeling for the past few days, were all connected.
The wildfire had already begun to poison the air, and it was affecting Lucas's health more than anyone realized. "Sarah, look outside." Bella heard James finally say, his voice cracking. "The fire is too close. We need to go." Bella's heart raced as she saw the look of realization on Sarah's face. She had been so focused on Lucas's illness, but now she understood, it wasn't just illness. It was the fire's smoke exacerbating everything, pushing Lucas to the brink. The family quickly gathered their things, and Bella did her best to stay close to them, leading them away from the front of the house and toward the backyard, where the escape route could be clearer. But as Bella tried to nudge them forward, she felt the heavy weight of the air shifting. The fire was closer than anyone could have anticipated. The sun had long since dipped behind the horizon, leaving a murky twilight to settle over the small suburban neighborhood. Inside, the air felt heavy, more than just the heat of a California evening. Bella, though still vigilant, found herself pacing around the living room restlessly. The family, who had been so busy trying to make sense of Lucas's condition and the growing uncertainty of the fire, seemed unaware of the danger that had already started to close in. Sarah had sat down with Lucas, rubbing his small back as he rested in her lap. His fever had subsided a little, but he was still unresponsive, his eyes half-lidded, barely acknowledging anything around him. James, ever the pragmatist, had gone to check the backyard, scanning the horizon with growing concern. The wind had shifted again, and there was a pungent smell of smoke in the air, sharp, acrid, and strangely persistent. Bella, who had been meowing softly at Lucas, now moved toward the window, her sharp eyes narrowing at the distant glow that seemed to flicker at the edge of the town's limits. The trees around the neighborhood were rustling unnaturally in the wind, their branches shaking as though they were being pushed against their will. Bella jumped up onto the windowsill, her paws instinctively bracing against the frame, trying to get a better view of what was happening beyond the house. The fire had moved closer, too close for comfort. Outside, the shadows grew darker. The once placid neighborhood felt as though it had shifted into an alien world, the peaceful streets now silent with tension. The scent of burning wood hung thick in the air, like a warning that no one was truly prepared for. Bella's fur prickled. The world outside had changed in ways that were beyond the control of the people inside the house. Lucas's breath was shallow, his tiny body shaking. His condition hadn't improved, and Bella felt a deep, instinctual sense of dread. She rubbed her face against his hand, trying to comfort him, but the tension in the air grew thicker. Something was wrong, and Bella could feel it deep within her. The wind shifted again, carrying a heavier, more threatening scent. Bella turned her attention toward the back door where Sarah was standing, talking softly to James. His face was drawn, his hands running through his hair as he muttered about how the fire was still far off, but the smoke was getting worse. The smell had reached the house, and the temperature had risen drastically. What if it's closer than we think? Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke, still trying to hold her composure. It can't be, James responded, though his voice lacked confidence. They said the fire was miles away. We're fine for now. Let's just keep Lucas calm and wait for it to pass. But Bella could see the doubt in his eyes. She could feel it, too, the thick, oppressive weight of danger hovering over them, the fire growing faster than any of them had anticipated. It wasn't just the wildfire they had to worry about anymore, it was the smoke that was invading their home, seeping through the cracks and walls, filling the air they breathed. The fire would soon be more than just a physical danger, it would be an invisible enemy. Bella, despite her small size, moved quickly to Sarah's feet, meowing urgently, clawing lightly at her pant leg. It was an unusual behavior for the cat, who was normally calm and reserved. But there was an instinct in her now, a drive to alert the family, to make them understand what she had already sensed. Bella? Sarah's voice softened, though she was confused by the cat's frantic behavior. What's wrong, girl? Bella meowed again, louder this time, and then bolted toward the front door, scratching at it with her paws as if trying to make an escape. She darted back to Sarah, then to Lucas, then again to the door. Sarah, I don't like this, James said, his voice tight. I'm going to check on the neighbors and make sure they've evacuated. Stay with Lucas. As James reached for his keys, Bella's heart raced. Her instincts screamed at her to act, to do something, but what? The fire wasn't just a physical threat, it was a silent predator that had crept too close. Bella jumped into Sarah's lap, purring softly as though to comfort her, but the urgency in her actions was clear. She wasn't acting like her usual, calm self. Something was coming. Just as James was about to head out the door, the unmistakable sound of sirens cut through the quiet evening. The fire department was moving closer. The crackling of the fire could now be heard in the distance, far louder than it had been just moments ago. The winds had shifted, and what had started as a small blaze was now a raging inferno, consuming everything in its path. The panic was evident in Sarah's face as she lifted Lucas into her arms. The air seemed to thicken, each breath feeling like it was harder to take. Bella darted toward the front door again, her sharp eyes darting to the trees swaying outside, the distant orange glow lighting up the sky like a warning. Her small body trembled with fear, her tail flicking nervously. We need to go. Now, Sarah whispered, fear rising in her voice. Lucas, still weak and feverish, stirred in his mother's arms, his tiny voice barely audible. Mom, what's happening? We're going to be okay, sweetheart, Sarah said, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her words. She looked at Bella, who was meowing urgently, as though trying to communicate something more. We need to go out back, through the yard, Sarah said, almost as though Bella had told her herself. Come on, James, help me get the bags. We have to go. Bella, despite the urgency she felt, was torn. She wanted to stay close to Lucas, to keep him safe, but she also felt the overwhelming pressure of the fire advancing too quickly. The family had to leave, and they had to leave now. As Sarah and James grabbed what they could, clothing, their phones, the essentials, Bella raced to the back door. She wanted to make sure the path was clear, to ensure they could get out. She stood by the door, watching as Sarah and James moved quickly toward the back of the house. The wind howled outside now, the gusts strong enough to shake the windows. Bella felt it deep in her chest, the heat from the fire was already reaching them. Sarah, James. Bella cried in her own way, her eyes locking on the family as if to say, we have to go now, or it's too late. The family didn't question her urgency. Sarah held Lucas tightly, nodding to James, who was right behind her, just as Bella led them toward the backyard. The fire was too close. As they reached the yard, the flames' reflection danced on the walls of their house, and the sound of crackling timber filled the air. The intense heat from the fire started to catch up with them as they ran. The wind was carrying the embers in their direction, and Bella's fur, already singed from her proximity to the house, was starting to burn. But she didn't stop. She had to get them to safety. As they neared the small creek behind the house, Bella pushed forward, leading the way through the underbrush. But just before they reached the water, a large tree branch crashed to the ground in front of them, blocking the path. The fire had reached the trees in the backyard, and Bella's heart raced as she saw the growing wall of flames. They were almost there. James was the first to push through, helping Sarah and Lucas climb over the fallen branch. Bella, her paws now scorched from the heat, struggled but finally managed to clear the way for them. The crackling of the fire grew louder, and the crackle of breaking branches filled the air. "Go, go, go!" James shouted, as they rushed toward the creek. Bella, just ahead of them, kept moving, her eyes locked on the water. Finally, the family made it. The fire, though now close, had not yet reached them, and the coolness of the creek's water provided temporary relief. They paused, gasping for air, covered in ash and sweat. Bella stayed close, her body trembling. She had led them to safety, but the fire was far from over. They weren't out of danger yet. The world around Bella seemed to pulse with urgency, her keen senses heightening every sound, every shift in the atmosphere. The thick smoke from the fire hung heavily in the air, mixing with the stench of burning timber and scorched earth. The night was closing in, and as the wind howled through the trees, it pushed the fire closer, faster. The flames cast a hellish glow on the horizon, a constant reminder that time was running out. As Sarah, James, and Lucas caught their breath by the creek, Bella stood a few paces ahead, her small body trembling with a mix of exhaustion and fear. The creek had provided a temporary refuge, but the fire was still advancing. The wind carried the embers like dangerous missiles, threatening to ignite anything it touched. Bella's fur was singed, the heat from the flames almost unbearable. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Sarah clutched Lucas tightly in her arms, her face pale, and her lips trembling as she tried to steady her breath. Lucas, once energetic and full of life, was now a sickly bundle in her arms, too weak to understand the gravity of the situation. His once bright eyes were now dull, his skin flushed with fever, his breathing shallow. The cool creek water had soothed them for a moment, but it didn't stop the rising panic in Sarah's heart. "James, what are we going to do?" she gasped, her voice breaking. The fire was closer now, the air too thick with smoke to even breathe properly. The fire had spread like wildfire, its path too quick and uncontrollable for anyone to outrun. James clenched his jaw, his eyes scanning the horizon, watching the thick plumes of smoke rise above the trees, blending with the night sky. "We need to keep moving, away from here. The fire's not going to stop. We'll head toward the old ranch. It's farther out, and we'll find a way to get help." Bella watched them, her ears flat against her head. She understood the urgency. They needed to move quickly, and they needed a safe place, somewhere beyond the fire's reach. But as she stood on the edge of the creek, the fire crept closer and closer, its presence now too impossible to ignore. There was no way they would outrun the flames on foot. As the family slowly made their way down the creek, Bella's senses sharpened once more. The air was thick with a metallic taste, the smoke stinging her eyes. There was something else now, something Bella couldn't quite place. It was the sound, a crackling that grew louder, almost like thunder, but it was the fire, spreading faster than they could have anticipated. Suddenly, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble as a large tree branch snapped in half, crashing to the ground just a few feet away. The creek, which had been their temporary safety, was no longer a viable escape route. The fire had reached the trees around them, and the wind carried burning embers straight into the creek's edge. "We need to move, now," James shouted, his voice laced with urgency. Bella dashed ahead, running across the uneven ground as the heat from the fire began to increase. She could feel the burn of the heat at her back. The fire was right behind them now. She could hear the hissing of flames as they collided with the underbrush and trees, the flames licking at the air hungrily. The sight of it almost made her freeze, but her instincts pushed her forward. Sarah followed, stumbling with Lucas in her arms, trying to keep her balance as she rushed through the brush. The wind picked up again, howling like a predator, and with it, the embers from the fire followed. The fire was coming faster. The family wasn't going to make it if they didn't keep moving. Bella could feel the panic rising in her chest. She had to keep them safe. The only way out was up the hill, to the old ranch house that James had mentioned. It was further from the town, and there was a fire break nearby, a small chance of survival, but the flames were closing in fast. Bella's instincts screamed at her to push harder. She darted ahead of them, her body now covered in soot and ash from the heat of the nearby fire. Her claws dug into the earth as she moved as quickly as possible, trying to find any clear path through the thickening smoke. The once silent night was now alive with noise, the roar of the fire, the crackling of the trees, the wind pushing the fire toward them with a terrifying speed. Sarah and James, struggling to breathe through the smoke, continued to follow Bella, but every step felt heavier than the last. The path was narrowing, with dead branches, thick smoke, and rising heat complicating their movement. "James, please, do we have time?" Sarah choked out. Her lungs burned with every breath she took. Her grip on Lucas tightened as he whimpered in her arms. His fever had spiked again, his small body drenched in sweat. "We don't have much time," James replied, his voice tight with urgency. "But Bella's leading us. She's trying to get us there." Bella turned back briefly, looking at them over her shoulder. She could see the fear in their eyes, fear that only grew stronger as the fire crept closer. There was no longer any time for hesitation. They were too close. With one last burst of energy, Bella darted ahead, and the family followed. Bella's small body raced through the underbrush, her legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. The wind howled, sending waves of heat crashing into her, but she didn't stop. The fire was too close now. The family had no choice but to trust her. At last, Bella reached the old ranch house, a dilapidated building on the outskirts of the town, where the firebreak had been cleared many years ago. It stood at the edge of a steep hill, surrounded by a wall of dirt that had been carefully cleared to prevent fires from reaching the land. The trees surrounding it were sparse, their branches heavy with the weight of the smoke, but the area seemed to be untouched by the flames so far. The wind was shifting once again, but Bella could tell this was their only chance. She turned to the family, who were just behind her, and meowed urgently, darting toward the door of the house. Her small body trembled from the exertion, but she pushed forward. "Here," James said breathlessly, as they approached the house. "The firebreak should hold. We're safe here, for now." Sarah, barely able to keep Lucas steady in her arms, finally stumbled through the door. The air inside the ranch was thick with dust, but it was cooler. They had made it. Bella had led them to safety, just as she had always done, her instinct guiding her through the fire, through the smoke, through the danger. The family settled into the dim light of the ranch, coughing from the smoke and exhaustion. Bella, her paws singed and her body tired, sat by Lucas's side, quietly watching over him. Lucas, still feverish and weak, looked up at her with a faint smile, his small hand reaching for her. Bella nuzzled his hand, purring softly, relieved that they had made it out in time. She had saved them. She had led them through the flames. But the danger was far from over. The fire was still raging. The night was long, and the battle wasn't finished. But for now, they were safe. And Bella would protect them, no matter the cost. The sound of crackling flames echoed in the distance, faint but ever-present. The ranch house, though offering some protection, felt small and inadequate against the immensity of the wildfire that raged nearby. Bella sat near the entrance, her golden eyes scanning the horizon through the cracked window. She could still see the glow in the sky, orange and red, painting the night with an unsettling hue. The fire, though briefly held back by the fire breaks, was relentless, and the wind seemed to grow fiercer by the hour. Bella could sense it, the very air itself trembling with the force of nature's fury. Lucas, still in Sarah's arms, whimpered softly, his small body trembling from the combined effects of his illness and the chaos they had just endured. Sarah, looking more exhausted than Bella had ever seen her, rocked Lucas gently in her arms. Her face was pale, drawn tight with fear, but she tried to smile for Lucas's sake. James, equally weary, paced back and forth, glancing out the window, trying to assess the direction the fire might take. "We're safe here for now," James said, his voice tight but trying to reassure his wife. "The ranch is solid, and the firebreak should hold. But I can't help but feel like it's still too close." Sarah nodded but didn't speak. She, too, could feel the anxiety gnawing at her insides, like a constant presence. There was something wrong about the air tonight, too thick, too oppressive. Lucas's fever had spiked again in the last hour, and he had barely been able to keep his eyes open. He needed medical attention, but they were too far from town now. They were stuck in this temporary refuge, with no way to know how long it would last. Bella jumped to her feet, her tail flicking nervously. Her sharp eyes darted to the window, where the glow of the fire was becoming more pronounced again. The wind was shifting, and she could feel the heat from the flames, even here. The firebreak would protect them for now, but only for a little while. The flames would find their way around. "We can't stay here," Bella's instinct seemed to whisper. The feeling in the air was almost suffocating now. She paced the room, her small paws clicking softly on the old wood floors, restless. Suddenly, James stopped pacing. His head snapped toward the window, and his eyes widened in disbelief. He ran to the door, and Sarah, seeing the alarm in his expression, followed quickly behind him, cradling Lucas against her chest. "It's moving faster than I thought." James's voice was urgent. "We need to go. The fire is coming back this way." Bella, still near the window, watched as the flames leapt higher, dancing across the sky like an unstoppable force. She could hear the crackle of burning wood, the roar of the fire as it consumed everything in its path. The fire was relentless, and it was coming toward them once more. "There's no way we can outrun this," Sarah said, her voice trembling with fear as she stared at the flames in the distance. "We have to try," James insisted. "We can't stay here. The wind is picking up, and the firebreak might not hold." Bella felt a cold, familiar sensation claw at her chest. The fear in their eyes mirrored her own, but she couldn't let them succumb to it. They needed to act fast. Lucas's condition, which had seemed like the most immediate threat earlier, was now compounded by the risk of the fire. If they didn't get moving, they would be trapped. "Bella," Sarah murmured, kneeling down beside the cat, her hand reaching for Bella's fur. "Can you help us? Can you show us the way?" Bella didn't hesitate. Her instincts, honed by a lifetime of watching over the family, kicked in. She had always been the silent companion, but tonight, she was their guide. She could feel the fire pushing against the edges of their sanctuary, its hot breath on their heels, and she knew the ranch was no longer a safe place. But where could they go? Bella bolted for the door, her small body a blur of motion. She didn't pause to look back, knowing they would follow. The sounds of the crackling fire were now far too close, and Bella urged the family forward with a sense of urgency that no one could ignore. Sarah and James exchanged a brief look, their worry mirrored in each other's faces. But they had no choice but to follow. With Lucas still in Sarah's arms, the family moved quickly behind Bella, who led the way down the narrow path beside the ranch house, toward a dense cluster of trees that bordered the foothills. "This way, hurry!" Bella seemed to call out to them, her small figure darting ahead, guiding them through the thickening smoke. As they ran through the underbrush, the fire's heat intensified. The wind carried sparks from the burning trees, igniting the dry grass along the path. The flames were creeping up from behind, and the smoke seemed to grow denser, stinging their eyes and throats. I can't breathe," Sarah gasped, clutching Lucas tighter as she stumbled over a root in the dark. Her voice shook with panic, but she kept moving, following Bella through the haze. James was just ahead of her, and he turned back briefly to help her steady herself. "We're almost there," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just a little further. We'll make it to the clearing." But Bella knew they were running out of time. The fire was close, and the wind was shifting again, pushing the flames toward them faster than before. The path through the trees had narrowed, and Bella had to weave in and out of obstacles to avoid the smoke that was now stifling their every breath. Bella's small form darted ahead, but this time, she wasn't moving as quickly as before. Her paws burned from the heat, and the acrid smoke made her throat feel raw. Yet, she refused to stop. "Come on, Bella!" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with a mix of desperation and hope. Finally, Bella reached the small clearing ahead, a small, open area surrounded by trees where the firebreak had once been, a tiny sliver of untouched earth that might offer them a moment's respite. Bella halted in the middle of the clearing, looking back at the family with urgency in her eyes. The wind howled again, and the fire was right behind them, the crackling now deafening. The flames were almost on top of them, the heat blistering their skin. The air had become thick with smoke and ash. Bella's fur was singed, but she was still there, still leading them. "We're here," James shouted, urging the family to the clearing as the flames reached the edge of the trees. Bella stood there, watching them, until they reached the center of the small clearing. They were safe, at least for the moment. As the family collapsed into the safety of the clearing, their hearts racing, the fire roared in the distance, its glow lighting up the night sky. The wind had pushed it close to the edge of the ranch, but for now, they had a temporary reprieve. Sarah, gasping for air, looked down at Lucas, whose fever had worsened in the chaos. He was still weak, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. "Thank you, Bella," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude and awe. The cat, despite her burns and exhaustion, sat proudly in front of them, her golden eyes watching the family with quiet devotion. The fire raged behind them, but for now, the family was safe. Bella had guided them to safety once again. The fire was still a looming threat, but they had made it this far, and as long as Bella was there, there was hope. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the acrid smell of smoke with it, thickening the air around the small clearing. Bella, with her fur singed from the close proximity of the flames, paced restlessly. Her small body, though exhausted, remained on high alert, her golden eyes darting constantly toward the edge of the trees. Every crackling sound, every gust of wind, made her instincts flare. She could feel the fire encroaching, slowly but relentlessly. The family, still reeling from the chaos, had settled on the edge of the clearing, Sarah clutching Lucas tightly to her chest. His small body was burning with fever, and his breaths came in shallow gasps. The journey through the smoke and heat had taken a toll on him, and Bella could feel his weakening pulse even from a distance. The fire was no longer their only problem, Lucas's illness had become even more severe. The toxic smoke and intense heat were aggravating his condition, and the distant sound of flames only seemed to worsen the situation. James, sweat dripping down his forehead, crouched beside Sarah, his face drawn with exhaustion. "We need to get him help," he said quietly, his voice filled with desperation. "I don't know how long he can last like this. We can't stay out here in the open, not with the fire so close." Sarah nodded, her eyes red from the smoke and the stress. She rocked Lucas gently, trying to keep him calm. "I know, but where can we go? We can't go back to the ranch, it's too close to the fire. There's nowhere safe." Bella paced in a tight circle around them, her tail flicking nervously. She wanted to do something, anything to help. Her instincts screamed at her to lead them somewhere, but where? The fire was spreading too quickly, and the smoke had made it impossible to see beyond the edge of the clearing. The flames' glow flickered in the distance, the fire now a looming threat that could reach them at any moment. Bella stopped in her tracks, her ears pricking as she heard the sound of running water in the distance. The creek, the same creek that had saved them earlier. It was a small, winding stream that cut through the nearby hillside, a slight depression in the land that led toward the outskirts of the woods. Bella's sharp eyes narrowed, and in that moment, she knew, the creek might offer a way out. The water could help protect them from the fire, and it might lead them to higher ground, a place where the fire wouldn't reach them as quickly. Without hesitation, Bella darted toward the edge of the clearing, her instincts taking over. She looked back only once, ensuring the family was following, and then she took off, her legs carrying her as fast as they could. Sarah and James, though exhausted, watched Bella's sudden movement, understanding the urgency in her actions. "Where is she going?" Sarah gasped, her voice strained from the smoke. James squinted through the haze, his brow furrowed in confusion. "She's leading us somewhere," he said, his voice almost in disbelief. "She's been guiding us all night. Maybe she knows where we can go." "We have no choice," Sarah said, still cradling Lucas against her chest. "Let's follow her." With that, they moved forward, keeping close to Bella as she bounded ahead. The flames still raged behind them, but Bella knew they couldn't stop, not now. The fire was coming closer, the crackling heat too near. She didn't pause as she ran, her small form darting through the brush, ears flattened against the wind. Bella led the family through the thick brush and over the uneven terrain, her legs sore from exhaustion, but her determination unwavering. As they neared the edge of the trees, the sound of rushing water grew louder. The creek was just ahead, winding its way through the forest. The family, despite their fatigue, quickened their pace, knowing that the creek was their only chance to survive. They reached the water's edge, the coolness of it a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the fire. The creek ran swiftly, cutting through the earth, its waters clear and cold despite the smoke that tainted the air. Bella slowed to a stop, her paws dipping into the cool stream as she glanced back at Sarah and James. Lucas, still feverish and weak, barely seemed to notice the change in environment. Sarah gently lowered him into the shallow water, where the coolness immediately offered some relief. She breathed a sigh of relief as the water helped to soothe Lucas's overheated skin, but her worries were far from gone. The fire was still dangerously close. "We need to move upstream," James said, his voice tight. "The creek might take us to a safer place. If we follow it, we'll be away from the fire's path." "Let's go." Sarah nodded, her breath shaky but resolute. She knew they couldn't stay in the creek forever, but it was the only chance they had. The fire was raging closer and closer, and if they didn't move quickly, they would be trapped. As they moved upstream, the dense smoke from the fire began to lessen slightly, though it still hung heavily in the air, burning their lungs with every breath. Bella, though exhausted, stayed ahead, her small form darting between the rocks and trees. The creek wound through the forest, a natural path that would lead them away from the fire, but the journey was far from easy. The panic of the family was palpable. Every crackling noise in the distance, every gust of wind, made them jump in fear, knowing that the fire could change direction at any moment. Lucas, still clutched in Sarah's arms, seemed to be fading in and out of consciousness. His fever hadn't relented, and his weak body seemed to grow even more fragile with each passing moment. "Come on, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, trying to keep her voice calm, though it cracked. "Just a little farther." James kept watch, his eyes scanning the forest around them, ever watchful for any sign of the fire. The heat from the flames was unbearable, and as they climbed higher, the smell of burning wood and dry grass became sharper. Bella's small paws had carried her far, but the family was still struggling to keep up, weighed down by their own exhaustion and fear. The creek's path led them toward a small ridge, one that offered a view of the valley below. From here, Bella could see the fire more clearly now, how it had spread far beyond the foothills, consuming everything in its path. The valley below was burning, and the smoke billowed into the sky like a dark, suffocating blanket. Bella turned back to the family. This was their only chance, the only place where they could temporarily escape the fire. She stopped, watching them carefully, as if silently urging them to hurry. "We can't stop here," Sarah said breathlessly, as she struggled to keep her focus. She looked up at the ridge, the slope too steep for them to ascend easily. "We need higher ground, away from the fire." James nodded, but his face was lined with exhaustion. He looked at Bella, whose golden eyes were fixed on them. "She's right," he said, breathing heavily. "We can't rest for long. Let's keep going. The ridge should give us some elevation. We need to get as far from the flames as possible." With renewed determination, they continued upward, the steep incline forcing them to move slower. Bella, despite her own fatigue, kept ahead, darting from tree to tree, guiding them with every step. The smoke grew thicker again, choking them, but the family pushed on. Lucas's weak cries were barely audible now, but Sarah never stopped moving, her eyes filled with worry. They finally crested the ridge, and Bella halted, looking back at them once more. Below, the fire raged, its reach still creeping closer. But up here, in the hills, they had a better chance. They were far enough now that the fire seemed almost like a distant memory, but the air was still thick with smoke. James, Sarah, and Lucas collapsed in exhaustion, the flames still flickering below them, but the immediate danger had passed. Bella sat by Lucas, her body trembling with the stress of the journey, but there was a sense of peace now. For now, they had survived. The wind had finally settled. The fierce gusts that had propelled the fire toward them were now reduced to a soft, almost mournful breeze. Yet, even though the intensity had subsided, the night still carried an overwhelming sense of tension, a feeling of anticipation that kept Bella's instincts on edge. She was exhausted, her body aching from the chase, from the burns on her paws and the thick smoke she had breathed in, but she couldn't rest, not yet. The family had found what little shelter they could in the small grove of trees atop the ridge. The fire still raged below them, but the natural barrier of the land offered some protection. The moonlight filtered through the smoke-choked sky, casting long shadows over the clearing where they had stopped. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional crackling of firewood in the distance. Sarah, her face a mixture of fatigue and relief, gently set Lucas down on the ground. He was feverish, barely conscious, and his small body felt like a fragile, burning ember in her arms. His condition had worsened throughout their journey, and now, with the fire momentarily behind them, Sarah could no longer ignore the harsh reality of his illness. "We have to get him help, James," Sarah said, her voice breaking as she turned to face her husband. "He's getting worse. His fever is still too high. I don't know how much longer he can hold on." James, his brow furrowed with concern, crouched beside Sarah, looking down at their son. Lucas's pale skin glowed under the faint light of the moon, and his eyes, though glazed and unfocused, still held the spark of recognition when he weakly looked toward them. "We're doing everything we can," James said, trying to sound hopeful, but the strain in his voice betrayed him. "We need to find shelter and supplies. We're not out of danger yet, Sarah. The fire's not far." Bella's eyes flicked between them. She could see the worry in their faces, but also something else, a quiet desperation that was just beginning to settle in. The fire had caused so much chaos, and though they had escaped, they still faced the harsh realities of their situation. Lucas needed help, and soon. As Sarah gently rocked Lucas in her arms, Bella moved closer, her small body curling beside them. The cat's presence, though silent, was a quiet comfort in the midst of the chaos. Sarah absent-mindedly reached down to pet her, though her mind was miles away, consumed by thoughts of their next move. "Why is this happening?" Sarah whispered to herself, though Bella could sense the question wasn't meant for anyone but herself. Lucas's illness had started as something small, just a cough here, a fever there. But now, in the middle of this nightmare, it was clear that something more serious was at play. What had started as a mystery had turned into a pressing emergency. "We need to find help," James repeated, his voice more resolute this time, though he too seemed unsure of what their next step should be. "We have to keep moving. The nearest town isn't far, and I think we can make it through the morning. But we need to be careful. The fire might still be on its way." Bella listened to them speak, but her instincts were focused on something else. The shift in the air, the subtle tension in the way the trees moved, the strange stillness of the forest, she sensed that they were not alone. The fire wasn't the only danger out here. But what was it? Suddenly, a rustling in the trees broke through the quiet. Bella's fur stood on end, and she immediately sprang to her feet, her ears alert. James and Sarah froze, looking around, their eyes wide in panic. For a moment, the night seemed to stretch on forever, a heavy silence blanketing them. Then, the rustling grew louder, followed by the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, moving through the brush. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with fear. James nodded, his hand moving instinctively to the knife on his belt, though it did little to comfort him. "It could be an animal. Stay close." Bella's eyes were locked on the direction of the sound, her body tense. She didn't move but stood silently, her muscles coiled, ready to spring. She could feel the presence of something else in the woods, something familiar but unsettling. As she stared into the trees, her golden eyes narrowed, and then, there it was. A shadow moving quickly between the trunks. It was a person. Bella's heart raced as the figure drew closer, emerging from the darkness. A man, ragged and tired, with dirt smeared across his face and singed clothes. His eyes were wild, frantic, yet strangely resigned. He appeared to be disoriented, almost as though he had been running from something. "Who are you?" James demanded, stepping in front of Sarah and Lucas instinctively. The man raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture, but there was a desperation in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." His voice was hoarse, as though he had been shouting for hours. "The fire, it's coming this way. I've been running through the woods. I thought I could get out, but..." Sarah, still clutching Lucas tightly, spoke up, her voice trembling. "What are you talking about? Are you from the nearby town?" The man shook his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. No, I was just passing through. The fires moved faster than we expected. You need to leave. It's not safe here." Bella's sharp instincts screamed at her that there was more to this man's story. She stood silently, observing him, waiting for the next move. James stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the stranger's face. "What happened? What do you know about the fire?" The man swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder nervously. "I don't know what started it, but it's spreading. I was just trying to find shelter, like you. But I didn't expect it to be this bad. I saw others running from the town. I think the whole area is going to burn." He paused, his eyes shifting nervously to the trees. "We should move, now. The fire is close. We can't wait much longer." There was a moment of silence as the gravity of his words settled over them. The fire, once a distant worry, was now a near and present danger. They had no choice. James turned to Sarah, his face grim. "We can't stay here. We have to get moving." Before Sarah could respond, the man stepped forward again, his voice quiet but insistent. "There's a shelter up the hill. It's a bit out of the way, but it should be safe. If we hurry, we can make it before the fire hits." Bella, who had been quietly watching, immediately moved toward the man, her fur still singed and her body tense from the wear of the night. Her instincts were clear, this man, despite his disheveled appearance, wasn't a threat. He was offering them a chance at survival, but it was up to them to decide if they could trust him. The family, despite their exhaustion, had no choice but to follow the stranger's lead. With Lucas still in Sarah's arms, and Bella leading the way, the group pushed onward, climbing the hill and moving toward the shelter the man had spoken of. The fire was close now, the heat growing more oppressive with every passing moment. But the stranger's offer of safety gave them the strength they needed to keep moving forward. As the fire raged behind them, threatening to consume everything they had known, Bella's sharp instincts guided them forward, trusting in the hope that the shelter would hold, and that Lucas might find the help he so desperately needed. The fire had changed everything. But Bella, the small, seemingly insignificant cat, had become the family's guide through it all. With her courage and instincts, she would continue to protect them, no matter what lay ahead. The small group continued to climb the ridge, the fire now a constant roar behind them, its glow casting an eerie light across the land. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke, thick and suffocating, made it hard to breathe. Bella, her fur singed and her paws sore, led the way, her sharp instincts pushing her forward despite her exhaustion. Sarah and James, their eyes filled with desperation, followed closely, their grip on Lucas tightening as they struggled to keep up. Lucas, though still weak, seemed to find comfort in his mother's arms, though his breathing was shallow, each exhale labored and ragged. The stranger, whose name they still didn't know, moved quickly in front of them, his gaze darting back every few moments to make sure they were keeping pace. His worn clothing was covered in ash, and his face, streaked with soot, showed signs of someone who had been running for longer than he let on. His eyes, though frantic and wide with fear, seemed to have a steady focus that Bella couldn't ignore. She kept her eyes on him, suspicious yet trusting, knowing that for now, they had no other option but to follow his lead. The air was heavy with the smell of burning wood and earth, and the wind continued to shift, carrying the fire's heat toward them. Bella could feel it now, the pull of the flames closer than ever, the oppressive weight of its presence too much to ignore. As they crested the final hill, Bella led them toward a small cabin that had been tucked away in the woods for years, seemingly untouched by time. The structure was worn, its wooden exterior faded from years of exposure to the elements, but it stood tall and strong. The cabin was surrounded by a stone wall, a makeshift firebreak that the stranger had apparently built years ago. Beyond the cabin, the hillside opened up, offering a panoramic view of the valley below, where the fire was still raging, but they were just far enough to be out of its immediate path. The man pushed open the door of the cabin and waved them inside. "This is it. For now, it's safe," he said breathlessly. James hesitated before stepping in, his eyes scanning the cabin for any signs of danger, but when he saw the firebreak, he relaxed just enough to lead Sarah and Lucas inside. Bella, already inside, padded over to a small patch of clean straw near the hearth and lay down, her muscles sore from the journey. She glanced at the family as they moved cautiously into the cabin, her sharp ears catching every sound. The room was dim, lit only by the fading light from the fire outside and the soft flickering of a lantern in the corner. A small fireplace sat on one wall, the remains of a low fire still smoldering. The stranger closed the door behind them, sealing out the wind, but not the heavy scent of smoke that lingered in the air. His breathing slowed, but his eyes remained wild, scanning the surroundings as though waiting for something. Bella noticed this. His anxious gaze that darted from one corner to the other. It seemed to be the only thing betraying his outward calm. Sarah laid Lucas down gently on a thin mattress that was resting on the floor, her fingers brushing his feverish face. His skin was hot to the touch, and his weak body barely reacted to her soothing strokes. Lucas had been through so much in the past few hours, and his condition had worsened far beyond what Sarah had anticipated. She felt helpless, her heart aching with every shallow breath he took. "We need to get him help. He needs medicine. I don't care if we have to find it ourselves, James. We can't stay here forever," she said, her voice cracking as she wiped a tear from her cheek. James sat down beside her, rubbing his temples as though the weight of the night had finally hit him. He glanced toward the stranger, who was standing silently near the door, his back to them. The stranger hadn't offered much in the way of introductions, but his knowledge of the area and the shelter had saved their lives. At least for now. "Do you have any idea where we can find help?" James asked the stranger, his tone sharp with urgency. The man didn't immediately answer. He stood near the window, staring out into the night, his hands clenched into fists. The silence stretched on for too long before he finally spoke. "There's a town to the north," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "But it's hard to get there now. The roads are blocked off by the fire, and even if you could make it through, the hospitals are overwhelmed. There's no guarantee you'd find what you need." Sarah's face tightened. "So you're telling me that we're stuck here, with a sick child, and no way out?" The stranger turned to face them, his eyes weary. "For now, yes. The fire's not going to stop anytime soon. It's spread too far, and I don't know if the town will be safe for much longer. If you want to survive, staying put is your best bet." Bella's sharp eyes locked onto the man, studying him. She sensed something was off. There was a hidden truth behind his words, and she couldn't quite understand it yet. The fire had been a natural disaster, but the way the stranger spoke, so detached, so resigned, made Bella question his motives. Before she could analyze further, Lucas's small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mama. I'm scared." Sarah turned quickly to Lucas, her heart shattering at the sound of his weak voice. She rushed to his side, smoothing his damp hair back from his forehead. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're safe now. Bella's here, and Daddy's here. You're safe." But as Sarah comforted her son, Bella could sense something deeper, a threat they hadn't seen yet. There was a heaviness in the air, a feeling of something approaching. She didn't know what it was, but her instincts told her it was not the fire that was the only danger anymore. As the night grew darker, the family settled into the small cabin, trying to rest despite the ever-present danger outside. The fire's glow flickered faintly through the cracks in the walls, casting eerie shadows inside. Lucas had fallen into a fitful sleep, but his fever was still high, and his breathing shallow. Sarah kept a constant vigil by his side, while James sat nearby, his face weary. Bella, ever alert, noticed that the stranger had not moved far from the door. He stood there, gazing into the distance, his figure outlined by the dim light. His posture was stiff, his gaze intense as though he was waiting for something. Something was off about him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, James spoke again. "What happened out there? You said you were running. Were you part of the evacuation?" The stranger's eyes flickered with something unreadable, then he slowly turned to face them, his expression hardening. "I wasn't part of any evacuation," he said, his voice low. "I was trying to get away. But there's more going on than you know. The fire, the smoke, it's not just natural. There's something bigger at play here." James's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? It's just a fire, right? Something that happens every year." The stranger took a step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just the fire, my friend. Something's been stirring in this area for years. And this fire, it's just the beginning of something worse. Something that no one's prepared for." The quiet tension in the cabin was suffocating. The stranger's words had hung in the air long after he'd spoken, like a cloud of smoke that wouldn't dissipate. "Something worse is coming," he had said. The family sat in a daze, their bodies exhausted from the long hours of fleeing and fear, but now their minds were more alert than ever. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The fire, the illness, the way Lucas's fever had spiked again, it was all becoming too much. James, though still trying to hold it together, had that look of disbelief on his face. He was used to handling practical problems, fire, survival, even Lucas's illness, but this stranger's cryptic warning was something neither of them could make sense of. Bella, who had been resting near Lucas's side, her body curled protectively around the child, suddenly perked up. The air in the cabin was thick with unease, and Bella's instincts were razor-sharp. She stood, her tail flicking nervously, and moved towards the window, her eyes scanning the outside world with an urgency that hadn't been there before. The fire was still burning, but there was something else. A shift in the wind, perhaps, or something in the way the smoke lingered in the air. It was almost as though the forest itself was waiting for something. "Bella?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. "What is it, girl?" Bella's ears twitched, and for a moment, she locked eyes with the stranger, who had remained standing by the door, his back to the rest of the room. There was something unsettling about him. Something not quite right. His gaze flicked nervously around the cabin, his eyes darting to the shadows, but he never seemed to meet anyone's gaze for too long. James noticed it too. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with suspicion. "You're not telling us everything. What do you know about this fire? About Lucas's illness?" The stranger flinched but quickly recovered, his face hardening. "I've told you all I can," he said, his voice more guarded now. "The fire's not the real problem. It's what comes after." Sarah's patience had worn thin, her motherly instinct pushing her to get to the heart of it. "What comes after? What are you talking about?" For the first time, the man looked directly at them, his eyes clouded with fear. "There's more to this place than you know. It's not just the fire. It's the land, the people who live here. There are things that have been buried for years, but now they're starting to wake up." His words hung in the air like a cold chill, and Bella's fur stood on end. James stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "You need to tell us what's going on. If we're going to get through this, we need to understand." The stranger hesitated for a long moment, and then, as if a dam had finally broken, he spoke again, his voice low and hoarse. "My name's Elliot," he began, his gaze flicking nervously toward the door, as though he expected someone to burst in at any moment. "I've been living out here for a while, since the fire season started. It's been bad, but not like this. The fires are just a part of it, just a warning. There are others, people who know more than they're letting on. And they've been making deals with the land. There's something buried here, beneath the soil." Sarah blinked, trying to piece his words together. "What are you talking about? What's buried here?" Elliot took a deep breath, the weight of what he was about to say settling in. "A long time ago, the local community, they tried to control the land, to make the fires less frequent. They started experimenting with things, rituals, ceremonies, even trying to commune with the earth. It was all secret. But whatever they did, they pissed something off. The fires didn't stop. They got worse. And now, it's coming back." There was silence in the cabin, as the family tried to process Elliot's words. "Rituals?" James asked, his voice rising with disbelief. "Are you saying the fire is deliberate?" "No," Elliot replied quickly. "Not deliberate. Not in the way you think. But there's a power at work here. The land, the fire is part of it. The wind, the smoke, it's all connected. It feeds off the land's energy, and it's waking up again. The fire isn't just random. It's a sign that something's changing." Bella, who had been listening intently, suddenly bolted to her feet, her fur bristling as her eyes scanned the woods outside the cabin. There was something else, something in the wind, in the vibrations of the ground beneath her paws. The ground felt wrong. Without hesitation, Bella bolted toward the door, her tail flicking as she jumped up onto the porch. She padded quickly to the edge of the cabin, her senses screaming at her to act. She sniffed the air, her nose twitching as she caught a strange scent, something that didn't belong in the natural world. It was like a mix of smoke, earth, and something darker. "Bella?" Sarah's voice echoed behind her, filled with concern. "What is it, girl?" But Bella didn't respond. She was already focused on something out in the trees, a movement, a shadow between the branches. The air around the cabin felt heavy, thick with the tension that had been building since they first arrived. There was a presence out there, and it was watching them. Elliot stepped forward cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he noticed Bella's strange behavior. "She senses it too," he muttered under his breath, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. I knew it wasn't just the fire. It's here, in the land. It's feeding off of the flames, growing stronger. Bella meowed sharply, her body tense as she stared into the woods, her senses on high alert. Something was coming. James stood, his hand reaching for the door. What's happening? What does she sense? What's out there? Elliot's face darkened. It's the land. The fire's just the first part of it. When the fire burns everything, it awakens what's buried beneath. And what's buried here isn't just bones or ashes. It's something alive. Before anyone could respond, a sudden crackling noise from the trees outside caused them all to freeze. It wasn't the sound of the fire or the wind, it was something else. Something moving, approaching them. Get inside. Elliot shouted, his eyes wide with panic. He rushed to the door, slamming it shut just as the air around them seemed to thicken, as though the earth itself was closing in on the cabin. Bella growled low, her body tense as she backed away from the door, eyes fixed on the window, watching as shadows flitted across the trees. There was something out there, something not quite human, and it was drawing closer. The knock came suddenly. A sharp, loud bang against the cabin door. It wasn't just the wind. It wasn't just a branch. Someone, had struck the door with unnatural force. Elliot cursed under his breath. It started, he muttered, his voice cold with fear. They're here. They've found us. Bella, ears flattened, darted back into the shadows of the cabin, her body ready for whatever was to come. The silence inside the cabin was unbearable. The bang on the door echoed in the small space, sending a chill through the family. Bella, her fur bristling, crouched low to the ground, her sharp eyes locked on the door, ears twitching with every slight noise from outside. She could feel the tension in the air, thicker than ever, the oppressive weight of something, ancient, closing in on them. Elliot, still standing near the door, was breathing heavily, his hand hovering over the doorknob, clearly reluctant to open it. We can't let them in, he said, his voice low but firm. Whatever is out there, we can't let it through this door. James, his face tight with fear, took a step forward, his hand gripping the back of a nearby chair. What do you mean, whatever's out there? Who are you, really? He demanded. His voice was sharp now, no longer just the calm protector. This man was hiding something, and James needed to know the truth. Elliot's gaze shifted nervously, avoiding James's eyes. He took a deep breath, but before he could speak, another knock came, this time, harder, more forceful, shaking the entire cabin. Lucas, lying weakly on the mattress, stirred and let out a small, frightened whimper. Sarah, her hands shaking, immediately went to him, brushing his sweaty hair from his face, but there was no masking the fear in her eyes. Her voice trembled as she spoke. What's happening? What is this thing? Elliot looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of something human, something sympathetic, appeared in his eyes. I never wanted you to be involved in this. You were just looking for safety, for shelter. He paused, running a hand through his disheveled hair, frustration evident in his expression. But this place, the land, it's cursed. There's something buried here, something the fire is feeding off of. And it's calling to them, those who can hear it. The knock came again, this time followed by a strange, low hum, almost like a chant carried on the wind. The hairs on the back of Bella's neck stood up, her ears pressed flat against her skull. She backed away from the door, eyes wide, her small body tense with instinctual fear. Something was wrong. The air outside was thickening, becoming dense with something unnatural. The hum continued, growing louder, vibrating the very walls of the cabin. And then, the door began to rattle. Get away from the door! Elliot shouted. He moved quickly, grabbing a heavy chair and wedging it beneath the doorknob, his movements frantic. But the rattle of the door only grew stronger, as though someone, on the other side was trying to force its way in. James rushed to Sarah and Lucas, pulling them further away from the door, his face filled with dread. "What is it?" he asked Elliot, his voice low with growing panic. "Tell me what's going on, now." Elliot didn't speak immediately. Instead, his eyes were glued to the door, his breath coming in shallow gasps as if he were preparing himself for something that could not be stopped. Finally, after a long, torturous pause, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're not human." There was a moment of stunned silence. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What?" she managed to choke out. Elliot swallowed hard, his face pale. "They're the ones who have been here all along. The ones who've been feeding off the land's power. The ones who created this curse. They're the reason the fires are so intense. They control it. And now they're coming to claim what's theirs." The door rattled once more, this time with such force that the entire cabin seemed to shudder. Bella, her body low to the ground, crouched by the door, her sharp eyes focused. The energy in the room had shifted, and she knew it wasn't just the fire outside. There was something alive out there, something far worse. "They're here," Elliot murmured, his voice hoarse with fear. He stepped back from the door, moving toward the far wall. "I don't know how much longer I can keep them out." Suddenly, a loud crash followed by the sound of scraping metal broke through the tension. The door splintered. Something on the other side was forcing its way through. A dark shape appeared beyond the wood, stretching in an eerie way, like shadows given form. Bella hissed, her back arched as she bared her teeth. There was something unnatural about it, something that made her instincts scream to flee, but she knew she couldn't abandon the family. She stood her ground, ready to fight with every ounce of energy she had. "We need to get out of here," Elliot said urgently, his voice shaking. "There's a tunnel out back. It leads to a cave system deep in the hills, it's our only chance." James looked toward the door, which was now sagging under the pressure from outside. "How far is it?" he asked, his voice tight with desperation. "Not far," Elliot replied quickly. "It's hidden by the trees, and it's well covered. But we need to move now. If they break through that door, we won't survive." The family moved quickly, Sarah lifting Lucas carefully, trying to keep him steady despite his worsening condition. Bella stayed close, moving toward the back of the cabin, her small body slipping between the spaces of the wooden walls. She was already ahead of them, following her instincts toward the back door. The cabin was now filled with an unnatural stillness. The sound of the fire in the distance seemed muffled, drowned out by the heavy, oppressive air inside. As the family approached the back door, Elliot quickly moved to the corner of the cabin, pushing aside a large pile of firewood. A hidden door revealed itself, small and camouflaged within the stone wall. "This is it," Elliot said breathlessly, opening the door with trembling hands. "This way. Hurry." Bella darted through the opening first, her paws moving silently over the cold stone floor. She glanced back at the family, ensuring they were following. The tunnel was dark, narrow, and damp, but it was their only chance. They had to get to the cave system before the creatures outside could reach them. Sarah followed next, her arms trembling as she held Lucas close. James brought up the rear, keeping a watchful eye on the door, as if he expected the shadows outside to burst in at any moment. Once they were all inside, Elliot pushed the door closed behind them with a loud creak. The heavy weight of silence pressed in as the family made their way down the dark tunnel. Bella, always ahead, seemed to know the way, her golden eyes guiding them through the darkness. The air in the tunnel was cooler, and the further they went, the more Bella's instincts seemed to grow calmer, though the unease in her chest never fully dissipated. There was something out there, something ancient, feeding off the fire, something that was now hunting them. They weren't safe yet. After what seemed like hours, they finally reached the end of the tunnel, where a small entrance led into the cave system. The air here was stale, but it was still a relief from the smoke and heat that had chased them. Elliot, who had been leading the way, paused at the entrance. "We'll be safe here, for now. "But this is just the beginning," he said quietly, his voice grim. Sarah and James, both exhausted, set Lucas down on a rock, trying to get him comfortable. His breathing was still labored, his fever burning hotter than ever. The fire still raged above them, the glow casting an eerie light through the entrance of the cave. Bella remained at their side, her instincts still sharp. She could feel it, the weight of something ancient and dark pressing in on them, something tied to the land, to the fire. She wasn't sure what it was, but it was growing stronger. And it was only a matter of time before they would have to face it. The air inside the cave was stale, a strange mixture of damp stone and the earthy scent of something ancient. The fire's glow was barely visible now, but the distant roar of flames still rang in their ears, a constant reminder of the danger they had narrowly escaped. The creature's knock had shaken the family, but now, in the silence of the cave, a new fear began to settle in. The darkness seemed to press against them, as though the cave itself was alive, watching them, waiting for something. Bella was the first to move, her body low to the ground as she padded silently across the uneven terrain of the cave floor. Her instincts, still sharp, urged her to explore further, to understand the cave's secrets. She could sense something deeper, something older, lurking beneath the surface. Behind her, the family sat in a tight circle, Lucas's weak body still burning with fever in Sarah's arms. Elliot, standing near the entrance, was quiet, his gaze distant as though he was contemplating something only he understood. The tension in the air was thick, and no one spoke for a long while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, James broke the silence, his voice low but filled with unease. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" he asked, turning to face Elliot, who had yet to fully explain the strange connection between the fire, the land, and the creatures outside. Elliot's eyes flickered, and for a moment, he seemed almost hesitant. Then, he took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice a low murmur. "This land," he started, "has always had a power. It's tied to the earth itself, to the fire that feeds it. Long before people settled here, the indigenous tribes knew about the forces at work beneath the surface. They called it the waking earth, a force of nature that could be controlled, or at least appeased, through ritual." Sarah looked up, confusion clouding her face. "Rituals? But what does this have to do with the fire? And why is it coming back now?" Elliot's face grew more solemn. "The fire, it isn't just natural. It's a cleansing. A way for the earth to renew itself. The rituals were meant to appease the fire, keep it at bay. But at some point, the rituals were abandoned, and the fire was allowed to burn unchecked. That's when things began to shift. The fire grew stronger, wilder. It became a force of its own, feeding off the land's power, and now it's out of control. It's waking up something that has been buried here for centuries." Bella, still pacing near the cave entrance, paused suddenly, her ears twitching as she caught a faint vibration in the ground. The earth trembled, as though something deep beneath the surface was stirring. She had felt it before, this strange, uncomfortable feeling that something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her fur bristled as she moved toward the back of the cave, her sharp eyes darting to the walls, trying to sense any change. James stood, his face tight with concern. "Elliot," he pressed, "what exactly are we dealing with here? What is the fire feeding?" Elliot hesitated again before responding, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just the fire, it's the land itself. The fire is a manifestation of the earth's rage. It's waking up something ancient, something that's been buried under the soil for hundreds of years. The creature, the ones I've been warning you about, they are the guardians of this land, born from its fury. They were created to keep people away, to protect the fire. But now they've been released." Sarah's eyes widened. "Guardians? You mean? What are they exactly?" Elliot looked up at her, his face drawn with fear. "They're not human. They're beings from the earth, creatures born of fire and smoke, forged from the very land they protect. They can be human in appearance, but they are more than that. They are part of the Earth's cycle, tied to its life and death. And right now, they're coming for us. Suddenly, Bella's ears flattened against her head as she let out a low, guttural growl, her eyes fixed on the entrance of the cave. She backed away, her tail twitching nervously as her instincts flared. Something was coming. "Bella?" Sarah called softly, her voice filled with concern. But Bella didn't respond. The cat was on high alert, her body poised for action. She let out a sharp yowl, urging the family to move. Elliot looked toward the cave entrance, his eyes widening in realization. "They're here," he whispered, his voice filled with dread. Before anyone could react, a strange noise came from outside, a low, rumbling growl followed by a harsh, guttural hiss, as though something was pushing its way through the very earth. Bella crouched low, her fur bristling with fear. Her golden eyes locked on the cave entrance, watching as the ground trembled once more. "They've found us," Elliot said, his voice shaking with urgency. "We need to leave, now." As if on cue, the walls of the cave seemed to vibrate again. The ground shook beneath them as heavy footsteps echoed outside, followed by the scraping sound of claws against rock. A dark shadow loomed at the entrance, moving closer with each passing moment. The creatures were coming for them, and there was no way to escape. "Get Lucas. We have to move," James shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her toward the back of the cave. Elliot rushed to the front, trying to secure the entrance, but the creatures were too close. Bella darted toward the back, her instincts screaming for them to run. She led the way, her small body moving swiftly through the narrow tunnels that wound deeper into the earth. The creatures were gaining ground, their growls getting louder, and the vibrations in the cave's walls intensified. The family, despite their exhaustion and fear, followed Bella. They had no choice but to trust her. Sarah, still cradling Lucas, rushed through the tunnels, her breath ragged as she fought to keep up. The fire's glow was still faintly visible from the cave entrance, casting an eerie light over their path as they moved deeper into the earth. After what felt like an eternity, the narrow tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern, illuminated by the faint glow of phosphorescent moss clinging to the walls. The air was thick with moisture, and the ground beneath them was soft, like a strange, living thing. "Where are we?" Sarah gasped, her voice filled with exhaustion. "We're deeper in," Elliot replied, his voice low. "This place, it's a natural cave system. It should be safe for now. But we can't stay here for long." Bella led the way through the cavern, her senses still sharp, her body tense as she continued to navigate the twists and turns of the underground passage. The sounds of the creatures outside were muffled now, but the air still felt charged with danger. Elliot paused, taking a deep breath. "We're safe for now. But we need to prepare. We can't outrun them forever. The creatures are bound to the land, and this land is not forgiving." The family gathered in the cavern center, their backs to the wall. Lucas, still feverish, rested on Sarah's lap, and for a moment, it seemed like the world had finally quieted down. But Bella remained alert, her ears flicking back and forth as though listening for something. As the fire continued to burn above, the family realized they weren't just escaping a fire. They were running from something much older, much more dangerous. And the worst part was, the creatures weren't the only threat. They still had to survive the land itself. The air in the cave had shifted. The tremors from the ritual had subsided, and the oppressive heat that had clung to the land like an unbearable weight was beginning to lift. The fire, still burning in the distance, no longer seemed as unstoppable as it had moments before. Lucas, lying on the stone altar, was breathing more steadily now, his skin cool to the touch and his fever broken. The light that had poured from the altar had filled the cavern, dissipating as quickly as it had come, leaving a quiet stillness behind it. Sarah leaned over her son, her heart swelling with relief as she gently caressed his forehead. His color had returned, and he seemed to be breathing more easily. The ritual, the word spoken, had worked. Lucas was safe. Elliot, though still on his knees, seemed to exhale a heavy sigh, as though he had just released the weight of a burden he had carried for far too long. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to catch his breath. "It's done," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "The fire will continue, but the curse on the land has been temporarily lifted. For now, the creatures, they're gone." James moved closer, his gaze shifting between Elliot, Sarah, and Lucas. The tension in the cave had lifted, but there was a new sense of unease, a feeling that the family was far from safe. The fire was still a danger, and the land, though momentarily at peace, held secrets that would take much more than a ritual to undo. "I don't understand," Sarah said softly, her voice still shaking with the aftereffects of everything they had just been through. "You said the fire was feeding something. You said there were creatures that were guardians of the land. What exactly were they?" Elliot stood slowly, his legs stiff from kneeling, and his eyes lingered on the altar as though he were still processing what had just happened. "The creatures, they were the manifestations of the land's power, born from the earth, tied to the fire. They were never truly alive, at least not in the way we understand life. They existed to protect the fire, the land's balance. And the ritual, it temporarily broke their hold. The fire, the land, they are all connected." Sarah and James exchanged a look, both still trying to process everything. "And Lucas?" James asked. "How is this all connected to his illness? Was this a result of the curse too?" Elliot nodded slowly. "Yes. Lucas's condition, it wasn't just the smoke or the heat from the fire. The land, the fire, it fed off of him, just as it fed off the land. He was being pulled into the cycle, into the earth's awakening. The fever, the weakness, it was all part of the land's curse. The fire draws life energy, and without the ritual to balance it, the land would have consumed him entirely." James stood quietly for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. "So, the fire, it wasn't just natural. It was designed to feed off the land's power." Elliot's expression darkened. "Exactly. But even with the ritual, even with the curse temporarily lifted, the land's hunger won't be satisfied for long. The fire will continue to rage until the land's cycle is complete. And there are still other things hidden beneath the surface, things tied to this place. Things we've only begun to understand." For a few moments, there was a heavy silence. Bella, ever the vigilant protector, had stayed close to the family, her sharp eyes scanning the cave for any signs of danger. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the sense of imminent threat seemed to recede. The creatures, the darkness, all of it, had been temporarily halted by the ritual, and now, there was only the faint crackle of distant fire to remind them of what was still out there. But Lucas, their son, their reason for everything, was stable, and for now, that was all that mattered. Sarah held him close, her hand gently brushing through his hair as he slept, his small body finally at peace. "We're safe," she whispered, almost as if to herself. The words felt like a promise, something to hold on to in the uncertainty of their situation. But even as she said it, she knew that safety was fragile, temporary. James stood beside Sarah, his hand on her shoulder as he watched their son, his heart full of mixed emotions, relief, exhaustion, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "For now, we are," he said softly. "But we can't stay here forever. We need to figure out what's next. The fire's still out there." Elliot, still standing at the altar, nodded. "You're right. The land's balance may be restored, but the fire, the cycle, it won't end until the land has consumed everything. We need to leave this place. But first, we need to make sure Lucas is strong enough to travel. The town, it's still an option, though dangerous." They sat together in the cave for a while longer, discussing their options. Elliot, though a stranger, seemed to know the land well enough to offer some guidance. But there was no denying the truth, they couldn't stay here. The cave, though a temporary shelter, would not protect them for long. The fire still raged, and its reach was vast. The town, now unreachable due to the fire, was nothing more than a memory. But the land, the curse, was something far deeper than they could have imagined. And as the night pressed on, the realization sank in. Lucas needed more than just temporary relief. He needed to heal, to regain strength. And the only way to do that was to leave the cursed land behind, to find a place where the fire's influence could no longer touch them. As the family prepared to leave the cave, Bella, ever alert, led them back toward the narrow tunnel that would take them back into the open world. The fire was still raging, but for the first time in a long time, the family felt like they had a small measure of control over their fate. The path ahead was uncertain, but as long as they had each other, and Bella by their side, they had hope. The fire might burn, the land might hunger, but they had survived the worst. The ritual had given them a chance to escape, a chance to break the curse and free themselves from the land's pull. As they emerged from the darkness of the cave into the fresh air, they looked out over the land one last time. The flames still danced on the horizon, but now, they weren't chasing the family. For now, they were free. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey into the heart of mystery, danger, and survival. Bella, the brave protector, guided her family through fire, fear, and ancient curses, all to save little Lucas from a fate worse than death. The land itself seemed to come alive with its own hunger, and the fire, fueled by something dark beneath the surface, was just the beginning of the family's struggle. As they fled the curse of the land, they were forced to make impossible choices, but ultimately, they found a way to survive and break free. The fire may still burn in the distance, but for now, they've escaped its grasp. Their journey, however, isn't over yet. Stay tuned for more thrilling adventures and mysterious stories to come. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of suspense, survival, and the unknown. And remember, sometimes the greatest dangers lie beneath the surface.